Muhammad Ali opened his hotel room door and found Joe Frazier's trainer standing there. The fight was over. Ali had won. Frazier had been stopped in the 14th round, but Eddie Futch wasn't there to congratulate Ali. He was there to tell him something. Something Frazier said right before Futch pulled him out of the fight. Something Frazier made Futch promise to take to his grave. But Futch was breaking that promise, because he believed Ali needed to hear it. And when Ali heard what Frazier had said, his hands started shaking. 16-16. The knock came just after 7 in the morning. Muhammad Ali was sitting on the edge of his hotel bed in Manila, staring at his hands. They were swollen, knuckles bruised purple and black, fingers so stiff he could barely make a fist. He'd been sitting like that for maybe an hour, hadn't showered, hadn't changed out of the clothes he'd thrown on after the fight. Just sitting, breathing, trying to understand what his body had been through. The Thrilla in Manila had ended 12 hours earlier. 14 rounds of violence that people would talk about for the next 50 years. 14 rounds where Ali and Joe Frazier had tried to destroy each other in 100-degree heat with the whole world watching. Ali had won, but only because Eddie Futch, Frazier's trainer, wouldn't let Joe come out for the 15th round. Ali had collapsed in his corner when they told him. Collapsed not from relief, but from the knowledge that he had one more round in him. Maybe. And if Frazier had come out, Ali wasn't sure what would have happened. His face was swollen, left eye nearly shut, jaw aching, ribs bruised from body shots that felt like Frazier was swinging a sledgehammer. Every breath hurt. Every movement reminded him that he'd just been through something that broke normal men. The knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. Ali looked up, didn't move, didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to talk, just wanted to sit there and try to process what had happened in that ring. The knock came again. Louder this time, more insistent. Ali stood slowly, walked to the door. Every step hurt. His legs were so tired they felt like they belonged to someone else. He opened the door. Eddie Futch stood in the hallway. Ali stared at him. Didn't speak, just looked at the man who'd stopped the fight, the man who'd saved Joe Frazier from another round, the man who, in Ali's mind, had given him the victory. Futch was in his 60s, grey hair, calm eyes. He wore simple clothes, a polo shirt and slacks. Nothing fancy. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. "Mohammed," Futch said quietly, "can I come in?" Ali didn't answer right away, just stood there, hand on the door, trying to decide if he wanted this conversation, trying to figure out what Frazier's trainer could possibly want to say to him the morning after the fight. Finally, Ali stepped aside. Futch walked in, looked around the room, saw the unmade bed, the clothes on the floor, the window curtains still drawn, the air conditioning running but not helping much with the Manila heat. Ali closed the door, turned around, waited. Futch looked at Ali's face, saw the damage, the swelling, the exhaustion in his eyes. Something crossed Futch's expression, not pity, something else. Understanding, maybe, the recognition of someone who'd seen what war looked like up close. "You should sit down," Futch said. Ali didn't argue, walked back to the bed, sat down heavily, his whole body grateful for the rest. Futch pulled over the desk chair, sat down facing Ali. There was maybe 5 feet between them, 2 men who'd just spent 14 rounds on opposite sides of a boxing ring. 2 men who'd watched their fighters try to kill each other. 2 men who knew what that fight had cost. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ali waited. He could tell Futch had something to say. Something important. Otherwise he wouldn't be here. Otherwise he'd be with Frazier, taking care of his fighter, making sure Joe was okay after the beating he'd taken. Futch leaned forward, hands clasped together, elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. Then he looked up and met Ali's eyes. "I need to tell you something," Futch said. "Something Joe said last night, after the 14th round." Ali's face didn't change, but something in his chest tightened. "Joe made me promise," Futch continued. "Made me swear I'd never tell anyone. Not the press, not the commission, not even his family. He made me promise to take it to my grave." Futch paused. His jaw worked. Like the words were hard to get out. "But I'm breaking that promise," Futch said, "because I think you need to hear it. I think you deserve to know." Ali's hands resting on his knees tightened slightly, the swollen knuckles pressed against the fabric of his pants. What did he say? Ali asked. His voice was hoarse, raw from shouting during the fight, raw from the damage to his throat from all those punches. Futch took a breath, let it out slowly. After the 14th round, Futch said, when Joe sat down on the stool, I could see he was done. Both eyes were swollen almost shut. His face was a mess. He could barely breathe. But that's not why I stopped it. Futch looked directly at Ali. I stopped it because of what Joe said to me. Ali waited. He looked at me, Futch said, and he said, I can't see him anymore, Eddie. But if you send me back out there, I'll find him. And I'll keep fighting until one of us doesn't get back up. The room was quiet, just the sound of the air conditioning, the faint noise of Manila waking up outside the window. Then Joe said something else, Futch continued. His voice was lower now, almost a whisper. He said, I need you to stop this. Because I won't stop myself, and I know he won't stop either, so one of us is going to die out there if you don't end it. Ali felt something cold move through his chest. Joe asked me to stop the fight, Futch said. Not because he couldn't continue, but because he knew if he did, one of you wouldn't survive it. Maybe both of you. Ali stared at Futch. His throat had gone tight. That's not what Joe told people, Ali said quietly. No, Futch agreed. It's not. Joe told everyone I pulled him out, told them I wouldn't let him continue, told them he wanted to keep fighting, but I wouldn't allow it. He let everyone think I made that decision alone. Why? Futch leaned back in his chair. Because Joe Frazier would rather have people think his trainer quit on him than admit he asked to stop. Because in Joe's mind, asking to stop means weakness, and Joe can't be seen as weak. Not by the press, not by the fans, not by you. Ali looked down at his hands, the bruised knuckles, the swollen fingers. Hands that had been hitting Joe Frazier for 14 rounds. Hands that had been trying to take him apart piece by piece. But that's not the whole truth either, Futch said. Ali looked up. Joe didn't ask me to stop the fight to save himself, Futch said. He asked me to stop it to save you. Ali felt his breath catch. What? Joe said to me, if I go back out there, I'm going to hurt him. Really hurt him. And he's going to hurt me. And we're not going to stop until one of us can't get up. I don't want to be the man who kills Muhammad Ali. And I don't want him to be the man who kills me. So you have to end this. Futch's voice was steady, calm, delivering the words like they were facts. Not interpretations, not assumptions. Facts. Joe Frazier asked me to stop the fight, Futch said, because he loved you too much to keep hurting you. The word hung in the air, loved. Ali opened his mouth, closed it, didn't know what to say. I know how that sounds, Futch said. I know what you two have said about each other. The things you've called him, the things he's said about you, the hate, the rivalry, all of it. But last night in that corner, Joe wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about you, about what would happen if that fight went one more round. Ali felt something breaking open inside his chest, something he'd been holding closed for years. Joe hates me, Ali said. His voice was barely above a whisper. No, Futch said firmly. Joe hates what you did to him, hates the things you said, hates that you called him ignorant and ugly, and an Uncle Tom. Hates that you made him the villain when he never wanted to be that. But Joe Frazier doesn't hate you. He never did. Futch leaned forward again. You know how I know that? Futch asked. Because a man who hates you doesn't ask his trainer to stop a fight to protect you. A man who hates you goes back out there and tries to finish what he started. A man who hates you doesn't care if you die in that ring. But Joe cared. Even after everything, even after all the things you said about him, he cared. Ali's hands were shaking, not from exhaustion, from something else. Why are you telling me this? Ali asked. Because Joe never will, Futch said. Because Joe's pride won't let him. Because Joe would rather carry that secret for the rest of his life than admit he protected you. And I think that's wrong. I think you deserve to know that the man you've been calling your enemy for 10 years asked his trainer to stop a fight to save your life. Futch stood up, walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. Joe Frazier fought you 3 times, Futch said, beat you once, lost to you twice. But last night in that corner, bleeding and half blind, he did something harder than winning or losing. He chose to save you instead of destroying you, and he'll never get credit for it. Because he made me promise not to tell anyone. Then why are you telling me? Ali asked again. Futch looked at him for a long moment. Because you've spent 10 years treating Joe like he's less than you. Like he's just some tough guy from Philadelphia who got lucky once. Like he's not worthy of your respect. And I watched you two almost kill each other last night. Watched you both push beyond anything human beings should endure. And I realized that if you don't know what Joe did, you'll go the rest of your life thinking you beat him because you were better. But that's not why you won. You won because Joe loved you enough to stop. Futch opened the door. You should think about that, Futch said. You should think about what it means that Joe Frazier saved your life last night. And maybe you should think about whether the things you've said about him were worth it. Then Eddie Futch walked out and closed the door behind him. Ali sat on the edge of the bed. Alone, staring at his hands. 14 rounds, the greatest fight of his life, the fight people would remember forever, the fight that proved he was the greatest. But he hadn't won it. Not really. Joe Frazier had given it to him by asking his trainer to stop, by choosing to save Ali instead of continuing, by deciding that their lives mattered more than their rivalry. Ali thought about all the things he'd said about Joe, the names he'd called him, the way he'd mocked him, the way he'd turned Joe into a villain to sell tickets, the way he'd made millions of people think Joe Frazier was stupid and ugly and a sellout. And Joe had taken it, taken all of it, fought Ali anyway, beat him in 1971, fought him again in 1974 and lost, fought him again last night and pushed him to the edge of death, and then stopped, not because he couldn't continue, but because he wouldn't let it go that far. Ali felt tears on his face, didn't know when he'd started crying, didn't care. He thought about Joe sitting in his corner, face destroyed, eyes swollen, barely able to breathe, asking Eddie Futch to stop the fight. Not for himself, for Ali. Ali had spent 10 years thinking Joe Frazier was his enemy, but Joe had never been his enemy. Joe had been his mirror, his equal, the man who pushed him harder than anyone else, the man who made him greater by refusing to quit, the man who showed him what courage really looked like, and Ali had repaid that by treating him like garbage. Ali stood up, walked to the window, pulled back the curtain. Manila spread out below him. The city waking up, people going about their lives, not knowing what had happened in that ring last night, not understanding what it had cost. He thought about going to Joe's room, apologizing, telling him what Eddie Futch had said, trying to make it right, but he knew Joe wouldn't want that. Joe had made Futch promise not to tell anyone. Joe wanted the world to think he'd been pulled out against his will. Joe would rather be seen as a fighter who was stopped by his trainer than a fighter who asked to stop. That was Joe's choice, and Ali had to respect it. But it didn't change what Ali now knew. It didn't change what Joe had done. Ali pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. "I'm sorry, Joe," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything." The words didn't fix anything, didn't undo the damage, didn't take back all the names and the insults and the years of treating Joe Frazier like he was less. But they were true, and they were all Ali had. 3 months later, Ali was back in the United States doing interviews. A reporter asked him about the Thrilla in Manila, asked him what the greatest moment of the fight was. Ali thought about it, thought about the 14th round, thought about collapsing in his corner when they told him Frazier wouldn't continue, thought about what Eddie Futch had told him the next morning. "The greatest moment," Ali said slowly, "was when Joe Frazier showed me what a real champion looks like." The reporter looked confused. "But you won." "Yeah," Ali said, "but Joe taught me something more important than winning." "What's that?" Ali smiled, a sad smile. "He taught me about dignity." The reporter didn't understand, asked a few more questions, moved on to other topics. But Ali understood. Joe Frazier had given him the victory in Manila, not by quitting, not by being weak, but by being strong enough to know when to stop, by being brave enough to put Ali's life ahead of his pride. And Ali would spend the rest of his life trying to live up to that example. Years later, long after both men had retired, someone asked Ali about his rivalry with Joe Frazier. "We weren't rivals," Ali said. "We were brothers. I just didn't know it at the time." What changed? The interviewer asked. Ali thought about that morning in Manila, about Eddie Futch standing in his hotel room, about the secret Joe Frazier had asked his trainer to keep. Joe changed me, Ali said. He showed me that being the greatest isn't about beating people, it's about respecting them. And I didn't respect Joe the way I should have. Took me a long time to understand that. Maybe too long. Did you ever apologize to him? Ali nodded. Many times, but I don't think it ever felt like enough. Because what I said about Joe wasn't just wrong, it was cruel, and you can't undo cruel. You can only try to be better. Do you think he forgave you? Ali was quiet for a moment. Joe Frazier saved my life in Manila, Ali said finally. Even after everything I'd done, even after all the names I'd called him, he saved me. So yeah, I think he forgave me, but I'm not sure I ever forgave myself. The interviewer asked a few more questions, but Ali's mind was somewhere else. Back in Manila, back in that corner, back to the moment when Joe Frazier looked at Eddie Futch and asked him to stop the fight. Not to save himself, to save Muhammad Ali. That was the real thriller in Manila. Not the 14 rounds of violence, but the moment when Joe Frazier chose love over hate, chose mercy over revenge, chose to end the fight instead of ending Ali, and Muhammad Ali would carry that knowledge for the rest of his life. Not as a burden, but as a gift. The gift of understanding that the man he'd treated as his enemy had been his friend all along. And that realization, more than any championship belt or any title or any victory, was what made Ali finally understand what it meant to be great. Not great at boxing, but great as a human being. Joe Frazier taught him that, in a corner in Manila, with swollen eyes and a broken face. When he asked Eddie Futch to save them both,